Okay. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen here. Again, my name is Eric Robinson. I'm a senior community manager with Aperion Management Group, and I've been working with Aperion for over 8 years now, starting as an assistant, and I have worked with around many architectural review committees. I currently administer the architectural review process for two fairly high-end communities in the south end of Central Oregon, down in the Sun River area. And amongst all of our clients, we have a lot of these committees and a lot of different submittals and reviews and stuff going on all the time. So this is an extremely applicable training topic for anyone who has interest in how the architectural review committees generally kind of tend to work and what the purpose is and why we have them, as well as any board members who want to learn more about, maybe you don't have an architectural review committee for your community and establishing one is something that you're interested in, or maybe you just want to learn more about, what the purpose of that is. So we're kind of going to go over all of those pieces today. The agenda for today is, again, kind of fairly simple 101 level of architectural review. If we have more details, questions that people want to get into, feel free. We can do that at the end or during that section as I'm talking. So I'm going to kind of go over what is an architectural review committee, how they're formed, why are they formed, a little bit more information about guidelines and processes. Some final thoughts, and then any Q&A that we have remaining at the end. So jumping right into it here, I'm just going to start with what is an ARC. And your community may have an ARC. It may be called something different. It may be a DRC. A design review committee, it may be an ADC, an architectural design committee. It can be called a lot of things. Usually it's kind of labeled in your governing documents what that designation should be. But they're all the same thing and they all serve the same purpose. These are committees and committee members who are charged with reviewing architectural and or landscape plans within the community. So we're talking new construction. If your community is no longer developer controlled, it's been turned over to the owners, but there's still vacant lots that need to be built on. This is going to cover, remodels, painting. Generally, an architectural review committee is going to review any exterior changes to a landscape or to a home that already exists, or again, to review new construction. Doesn't want to change. There we go. Back in ancient times, this would be an ancient construction defect dispute for the Leaning Tower of Pisa there. So why do HOAs establish architectural review committees? The main purpose of a homeowners association is not to send letters about trash can violations and not to bug people about how tall their grass is or whatever you want to pick that people really don't like HOAs about. The primary purpose of a homeowners association is to protect the property values of the homes within the community. So, a home is generally the largest investment that a person makes, and protecting that value and even increasing it through homeowners associations, through the community standards, through the architectural standards, through rules and regulations that assist in achieving the look and the feel and the neighborliness that a community may want, is the primary purpose of an HOA. So again, they do this by maintaining the assets in the property and enforcing all those rules and regulations and achieving aesthetic harmony, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. The Architecture Review Committee is maybe the most important tool to achieve that last point. In the absence of an Architecture Review Committee, or an HOA in general, you may go through a neighborhood and you could see things like this. Obviously, these are some extreme examples, but you know, we brought in an assistant community manager. We hired a new one fairly recently, and she made a comment as she was going through a lot of our clients' communities. And she said, "Boy, you sure can tell when you're driving through a community whether or not they have an HOA. It's very apparent when you drive through an HOA controlled community and when you drive through one that's not, which one is which." And that's through the enforcement of those rules, regulations, and the architectural control that the ARC has for all those things that we talked about previously. So how are the ARCs formed? Your community's governing documents is generally going to provide guidance on how these architectural review committees are formed. And I'm going to give you an example here. So this is a little capture from one of our clients talking about how the Architecture Review Committee is going to be formed, what it does, how many members it has, is there a chair, kind of what their obligations are, their terms, all those kinds of things. So, you know, this particular one talks about what their scope is. They're going to review anything that's going to be, you know, erected, altered. They're going to review construction plans and specs, assure quality of workmanship and materials to ensure harmony of exterior design with the existing improvements in landscaping. So again, remember that wording. I'm going to address that in a little bit in a new section from the last training that I've been thinking about. So it does say also here, and this is important to note, that the DRC is not responsible for determining compliance with structural and building codes, solar ordinances, zoning codes, or other governmental regulations, which are the responsibility of an owner. You certainly don't want your architecture review committee to have to be experts in building codes and permitting and interface with the city or whomever they need to acquire those materials. That's all the onus of the owner and the person doing the construction. The DRC's real focus is ensuring that that design and those materials are all going to, you know, mesh with everything else that's going on in the community. It then goes on to appointment and removal. In this particular case, can't have less than one, can't have more than five. It talks about the declarant rights. Again, if you're declarant controlled, that would apply. If you're not, it would not. And then it talks about terms. So generally, your governing documents are going to lay out how these committees are formed. If it's completely silent on the formation of a committee, well, you probably want to talk to your community manager, or you could go to Oregon law to determine what your options would be for forming an architecture review committee in those instances. So one question that I get a lot when we're talking about appointing ARC members, forming new architecture review committees is who serves on these things? Because when you tell someone, you know, what the architectural review committee does, which is receives, interprets, and reviews plans for exterior modifications and new construction, a lot of people are going to think, well, I don't know how to do that. It's the same reaction we get when we want people to be like the treasurer of their association. Well, I'm not an accountant. I don't really understand, you know, what's going on here. I'm not very good with numbers. So thankfully, there are options that we'll talk about in a little bit, but anyone who meets the requirements as laid out in the documents can serve on the architecture review committee. you don't have to be an architect, you don't have to be a landscape designer, you don't have to be an engineer or any of those things. I've had architecture review committees that were chaired by retired school teachers, people who worked in law enforcement. I mean, all different kinds of backgrounds. There's no requirement to know how to read and interpret these plans. So none of that is necessary. But the likelihood is that if you do have people who want to volunteer and serve on your architecture review committee, and they don't have the ability to read and interpret plans like something like this, which talks about building envelopes and grades and, plant and tree removals, all of these pieces, or something like this. I don't think I could look at this drawing and be able to reconcile whether or not its design matches up with a very specific set of guidelines as an architecture review committee member. So what does an ARC do in those instances? If you don't have the expertise, you need to find the expertise. So one thing to consider, and I would highly recommend, if you have an active architecture review committee, if you're seeing a lot of submittals for new construction or remodels, is to look into getting a consultant to your architecture review committee. And oftentimes that's also going to be in your governing documents. It's going to say the committee can retain consultants for review, for expertise in different areas as it's performing its reviews. So the consultants serve at the direction of the ARC for specific expertise. These are generally going to be non-voting objective members. They're not going to be members of the community. Usually they're architects or they're landscape designers, depending on the kinds of submittals you need to get consulting reviews for. And they're going to provide guidance on how a specific submittal relates to any of the design guidelines or other design rules within your documents, within your guidelines themselves, or within the community. So they can be somewhat difficult to find, especially now. Architects are quite busy. But Aperion, we do have a request for proposal, an RFP for seeking a consulting architect. If that's something your ARC would be interested in, or your board would be interested in, go ahead and contact your community manager, and we can tweak that for your needs. But if you have a review committee that doesn't have the expertise to read plans like the ones I just showed, I would highly recommend looking into retaining a architectural consultant who is going to be able to interpret and review those plans, and generally then will provide a letter to the ARC members stating, this is meets all of the requirements in the design guidelines for new construction, or this kind of roof isn't allowed for the guidelines. They're going to need to go ahead and go back and come up with a new solution for the roof. So certainly something to consider if you feel like it's necessary with your committee. I'm just going to pause right there. Does anyone have any questions up to this point? All right, groovy. So the next question that I kind of wanted to answer with this training and with this agenda is what are design guidelines? Like, does your community even have these? If you don't have these, where do you get these from? I'll say a lot of communities don't have a very specific set of guidelines. They draw their rules from the governing documents, from language that's outlined in the CCRs or the bylaws regarding what the homes are supposed to look like. But I would recommend highly that design guidelines be instituted in your community if you have an active ARC. So any documents or language providing guidance rules to the association on what is or is not allowed would be in those design guidelines. And they can vary greatly in makeup and complexity depending on what kind of community we're talking about. They are generally written by the Architecture Review Committee, often in conjunction with a consultant, or they're written during community development. The developer will, come up with maybe a simple set of design guidelines that's going to guide their decisions as they're building their homes in the community to achieve whatever vision it is that they had for that development. So if you don't have design guidelines, their absence can make the work for the Architecture Review Committee really difficult, because it's going to open up all of their reviews to subjectivity, to unclear rules and expectations with very little guidance for owners. And there's not a lot probably that's more frustrating to an owner to have to guess about what might be allowed in the community, or what might be reviewed and approved by the Architecture Review Committee. That kind of thing can cause a lot of back and forth between an applicant and the committee. It can cause difficulty in maintaining the same kind of precedents over the course of time. If you have differences, you have people leaving or coming onto your committee, you change consultants. We're going to get into this a little bit more through the other slides, but you want to be as specific and clear as to what's allowed and what's not in the language, in the application, in the guidelines, whatever you have in place for your community, because that's going to be really helpful to the owners, and it's going to be really helpful to your committee themselves. So I want to talk a little bit more about this, and hearkening back to the language that I asked everyone to kind of note earlier. This is a really good example that I see in a lot of sets of design guidelines that to me is very ambiguous. So vague and ambiguous language in your guidelines, such as, neighborhood harmony, aesthetically pleasing or tasteful, that kind of language is extremely difficult for architecture review committees to review due to its subjectivity. If you have guidelines now, if you're now, after listening to me, thinking about establishing some guidelines for submittals, be as specific as possible with the style, with the look and the feel and the physical appearance of the homes and the landscapes as you can. Now, I don't see a lot of guidelines that have, specifications for every nail that needs to be put in the house. Some of this language can, help achieve what you're trying to achieve with reviews and submittals in your community. But there's a way to do it that I think can evoke a picture in someone's mind of what the community is looking for. And I'm going to give you an example here. So again, I pulled this from one of our current clients for a community that I manage, that I administer this process for. And it talks about the overview in the guidelines. So this is one of the first things that someone's going to read when they open this particular set of design guidelines. It talks about the character of the homes in the community. Is established the application of an American tradition found in the essence of the post and beam construction methodology, expressed by the massing of a series of stepping forms, large timber roof frames supporting gabled roofs, expansive covered porches and decks extending from the living areas. The buildings are recognized at a distance by large simple roof forms using gables and hops, siding placed in a horizontal pattern, stone column bases, foundations, and accents. The structures are a mixture of heavy timber details with natural colors and accents. Natural light is used to welcome and warm in a way that is refreshingly rugged and friendly. Now, even though that language in those guidelines doesn't really give you anything specific, it doesn't say what kinds of stone you need to use, it doesn't say how much of these elements needs to be present. I feel like you can read that section and you can see in your mind kind of what that home is and that community is going for with their homes, but it gives the people enough flexibility as well to make something unique and to kind of make it their own. So it's a fine line to walk. But I feel like that's an example of good language that's still got some flexibility in there, but also gives someone reading these guidelines a really clear picture of what it is that these homes need to look like. I'm gonna go back for just a second. I wanted to share, as I was getting ready for this training, I wanted to share maybe a piece of case law that came out of an architectural review process that used ambiguous language, like we were talking about before. So the thing that I found was in Florida, and the owners had submitted an application to build a flat roof on their home. All of the homes immediately surrounding theirs were all peaked roofs. However, nothing in the governing documents or their design guidelines set out any specific requirements on what exactly a roof's shape or form needed to be. So the ARC in this case denied the owner's flat roof, saying they had a very strong feeling that it would not be architecturally compatible with the other homes. In the end, that owner built the flat roof despite the disapproval, arguing that the ARC had no authority to impose a prohibition against flat roofs. It eventually did go to court, and the judge sided with the owner, saying in the absence of an existing pattern or scheme of a type of architecture, which puts a prospective purchaser on notice that only one kind of style is allowed, either in the recorded restrictions, such a board does not have the power or discretion to impose only one style over another. So, you know, if you have guidelines or documents that say nothing about what kinds of roofs or what shape or massing a roof might need, you could run into a situation like this where everybody knows a flat roof isn't going to fit in the community, but because there's nothing prohibiting it in any language with this review committee or with the association's governing documents, that community now has a flat roof amongst all other pitched roofs. So avoid vagueness and ambiguity. So I wanted to share this with everybody briefly. This is, again, I'm drawing from some of our clients, but this is an example of a table of contents for a set of design guidelines that, you know, has different specs and different materials and different things that are allowed and not allowed throughout, you know, all of the process and all different situations that may be encountered with that build. Building envelopes and setbacks, driveways, garages, fences, swimming pools, lighting, drainage, pet control, height, square footage, finishes, roof, all of those things. Now, this is probably an extreme case, you know, obviously in an upscale community that, you know, with all custom homes, but just to give you an idea of all the things that a set of design guidelines may have to cover.
Eric, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead with the question.
Sorry, just to go back to the flat roof question. I think that it's important that the review committee does consider it in the context of modern circumstance versus past. In that development, for instance, those CC&Rs or whatever they were put in place before solar panels existed. Maybe the person wants a flat roof to put solar panels so the neighborhood doesn't have an eyesore of peaked roofs with solar panels, all facing the south. So that it becomes like Diamonds Are Forever, the James Bond movie, where they used the diamond to reflect the laser beam as a weapon. So I just think, and things like xeriscaping, we're talking about that for the atrium in terms of trying to save on water usage and landscaping costs. The term is only 40 years old, so it may not be in a lot of these documents.
Mike, that's a really, really good point, and thank you for bringing it up. The design guidelines for a community are, to my knowledge, they're not a recorded document, meaning that you don't need a threshold percentage of owners within the community to vote on changing them. The design guidelines should be a dynamic, evolving, changing document, because you're right, Mike, styles change. The things people want with their homes change. Solar, exactly, solar roofs. This particular set of guidelines that you're looking at here, this community was built back in the mid-90s. It didn't have anything about solar panels or solar, power or anything like that. So we recently did do a revision and we added a whole section on that in here. Now what that's going to do is also it's going to come up with questions of grandfathering and precedence and all of those questions that are the real sticky things that oftentimes the committee has to deal with, that I'm going to talk about in a few moments. But that's a great point. Paint scheme. I have a community down south. If you've ever been in the Sun River area, that all the colors down there are very muted. They're very earth, natural kind of tones to blend with the surrounding environment. I had a community down there that really wanted to add some modern flavor to the allowed paint schemes. So we brought on a color consultant. She visited the community and she put together a whole binder of, more modern, but still keeping within the kind of natural feeling that community has, but coming up with some more modern options for people to use. So it could be paint, it could be roofs, it could be whatever. But that's a great point. Times do change. Now it may not be the ARC's job to figure it out, but what may happen in that case is if you change something in your guidelines that you're going to allow something now, or you're going to prohibit something now, someone needs to make sure that doesn't directly conflict with anything that's in your recorded governing documents. In which case, if there is a conflict, the recorded governing documents will always win in the hierarchy of control over design guidelines. So you would want to fix that through an amendment of some kind.
Sounds good, thanks.
So going on to money, right? So consultants, architectural consultants, even the administration of the design review process by your community manager or whomever does it, how do they get paid, right? Like no one's working for free here. So my suggestion in this case is to ensure that the HOA itself, the association itself, isn't bearing the burden of paying for an owner to go through their architectural review process. So what I mean by that is, if I'm submitting a home for new construction and it takes a consultant, 6 hours of his time amidst a couple meetings and a few reviews at $150 an hour, and it takes the manager, that same amount of time at, $100 an hour, all of a sudden you've got $1,000+ bill that whose responsibility is it to take care of that? All the other owners in the association shouldn't have to be paying for the review of that owner's ARC submittal. So my suggestion here is, as part of the establishment of a process and design guidelines in your community, is to come up with a schedule of fees. Charge an application fee for every ARC application that's submitted, and or refundable, construction bond or something like that. A lot of times you'll do the two in conjunction. So, maybe it's $300 or $500 for someone to submit a new construction submittal. And maybe they have to pay $1,000 construction bond that the association is going to hold in case their review goes over the $500 review fee. You have some more money that you can pull from to cover that bill. Or if any association property is damaged during the course of construction, you have a bond for that as well. So, there could be a schedule. So new construction is this much, remodel is this much, landscape changes are this much, kind of a sliding scale depending on how much time it generally takes to do those submittals. So how is this all done? Like, what's the process of a review for an architecture review committee? Some of the questions, I can't tell you what that process is going to look like. It may be outlined somewhat in your documents, but as you're establishing this, some of the things to think about are, how are the submittals provided? Are they just provided electronically? Do you need blueprint sized, paper copies? Because the architect is old school and he likes to mark up paper copies. When and how are those plans reviewed? I have committees who have a very strict schedule. We will accept applications in this window. We will review items, during this time frame, and we'll have those reviews back to people during this time frame. And they have a very rigid schedule of meetings where they accomplish that work. I have another committee where, as soon as I get a submittal and I review that everything's there, I just send it along. And they all review it over email, or they get on a quick Zoom and they review it, but they don't really have a schedule. They just review things as they come. Another important question as you're establishing process is, how long are you going to give the DRC or the ARC to respond to a submittal? Oftentimes language in your documents will say something like, the ARC has 30 days to review and get an answer back to the applicant. If they don't, that submittal is automatically approved. That language exists in a lot of documents, so it's something that really needs to be paid attention to, because the last thing you want is to have a committee or the administrator drop the ball on what a deadline is, and all of a sudden something that never would have been approved gets approved by default because you've gone too far in that review window. Maybe you build language in there that it can be extended. And then the final piece, final question maybe to ask yourself is, should there be a statute for approval? Oftentimes we'll have people who submit plans, they get approvals, and then for whatever reason, the price of lumber escalates to ridiculous proportions, or they come upon hard times or a health issue and they decide not to move forward. A question to ask yourself as you're establishing the process in your guidelines is, how long is that approval good for? Is it good for 6 months? Is it good for a year? At what point do they have to resubmit and get approval again? Because as we just talked about, the guidelines might change. The consultant or the members of the ARC may change. So having a statute of approval is another good practice for your architectural review committee. This is just another snip. Legalese obviously taken from a previous client's process, but this is right out of their CCRs. This actually it lays out the process right here. So if you're creating guidelines from your documents, unless you want to go through an amendment with your owners, this would be, the process here, 21 days to review plans. Here's their, what they need to look at when they're doing it. It even talks about how long people have to build and how fast cleanup needs to happen. So again, this is just an example of the more detailed you are with your expectations and your process with your owners and your applicants, the easier everybody's job is going to be when it comes to this. And I will tell you, more disagreements, more lawsuits come out of disputes regarding architectural review than anything else. Because this is a person's home, this is what they want to do, and saying no doesn't usually go over well. So details. I'll go through a few other things to consider as you're thinking about what this looks like for your community and your committee. One question, this is going to come up guaranteed anytime an architectural review committee does not approve something or approves it with conditions. That owner, that applicant who gets that news is going to go around your community and they're going to see if that thing that they want, that they're being told no, exists anywhere else in that community. And if it does, you're going to hear about it. You're going to say that address has this thing that I want, and you're telling me no, but it already exists here, so you have to let me do it. That is a very, very standard thing that's going to happen during this process, especially if there's a contentious thing that an ARC and an owner is going back and forth about. So what I will tell people in this case is that I'll tell them some of the things we've already talked about today, in that the design guidelines are a dynamic document. They do change and they do get revised over time. So it's possible that something that was approvable in the past, because of whatever reason, that's no longer something that's allowed in the community. That thing that was approved back in the day would be grandfathered in, but everything moving forward has to meet a different criteria or isn't allowed. So bottom line, and we're not standing in front of a judge here, but if something's been done in the past, it doesn't chain every single ARC member and approval moving forward to say yes to that same thing. So past decisions do not necessarily have to guide future decisions, especially in the case of, like, let's take color, for instance, like paint colors of a house. I had, specifically an experience I had is we had a home painted a color that everyone thought was going to be fine. On a small piece of the home, it during the light that it was looked at, it looked okay, and everyone approved it. And when this giant house got painted this color, it looked like the color of salmon. Like, it was just this awful orange pink. It did not turn out how anyone thought it would. So in that case, the ARC probably made a mistake in approving that color, but because they approved it, does that mean if someone wanted to paint their home that same color, they would have to approve it in the future? And the answer is no. Even though people feel like that's a reason that the ARC should always say yes, past decisions don't set future precedent. Because the revisions, because the guidelines can change, because ARC members and standards and criteria in the community can change. So I'm just warning you, as if you're on a committee, if you're doing this, that is 100% going to happen. It also brings up the whole question of grandfathering, right? So, you know, this will also happen a lot in your community as it ages. Are things that were done in the past. You know, if you create a rule saying, you know, let's say, oh gosh, what's a good one? Let's talk maybe screening, like screening an air conditioning unit on the exterior of a house. Maybe your architecture review committee feels like, I think the screens need to be higher, because as you're driving, you can still see the unit. You know, we're going to take the required screens from 3 feet to 4 feet or something like that. You know, just pulling that out of thin air. In that case, all of the screens that were built at 3 feet would be you would want to grandfather those in. So those are still approved, but everything moving forward from that point would need to meet the new criteria. So it's important to remember that whenever a submittal is made, they are held to the standards and the criteria of the community's design guidelines when that submittal is made, not in perpetuity through the end of time. If things change, then they would have to change, you know, whatever they had approved in the past. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Going down to number 3 here, another thing that might already be laid out in your governing documents, but is going to have to be part of your architectural review guidelines and process, is what is the process for a hearing or an appeal of the design review committee's decision. There has to be a way for an owner, an applicant, to go past the ARC and get a final ruling on whatever issue it is that they're disputing. Typically, that's going to be the board of directors who's going to who's going to hold a hearing and hear an appeal. You know, unless there's a really, really good reason to overturn the ARC's decision, like they're just blatantly wrong in what they've decided. I've always seen a board back up their committee members and generally hold the decision, because if you have a board overturning ARC decisions, that's going to lose the ARC credibility and confidence for anything going on in the future. But make sure that there's a process laid out. So moving on here to number 4, you've probably been listening to me for the last 44 minutes and asking, why on earth would anybody want to serve on an ARC? It sounds really hard. People get angry and defensive about their houses. Like, you know, there's a lot of reasons to serve on an ARC. There's a lot of you know, benefit to volunteering and being a part of this vision and the aesthetic harmony of your community. But I think as a volunteer, you also want to know, how are you protected? If someone's like, I'm gonna sue, like this is BS and I'm gonna sue and they're all wrong, and that could definitely happen. So the good news is that your community, hopefully, if you're managed by a peer, and the answer is yes, is going to have directors and officers insurance. And that directors and officers insurance covers any volunteer committee members in your community. So if someone decides they're going to sue because they can't get what they want and they feel they should, and they feel that the ARC and the board are wrong, no one is going to be able to be individually taken to court over those decisions. The D&O insurance will kick in, and the association will utilize, you know, the insurance appointed attorney to go through that legal process. Individual committee members won't have to hire their own attorneys. They won't be financially at risk for the decisions that they make. ARC members are legally protected under that D&O insurance. Now, this last piece is board liaison. So, there's a couple reasons to have one member from your board of directors act as a liaison to the design review committee. A liaison for the board is generally going to be copied on ARC correspondence, on decisions that they make, on pretty much all of their business, but they're not going to vote, and generally they're not going to enter the conversation. In my mind, a board liaison is more to monitor the activities of the committee and to be aware of any issues that are coming up in case it gets escalated to the board of directors in terms of a hearing, appeal, or other legal action. So they've been there from the very start and seen, how everything is played out. So that's very valuable to have to a committee as well. My final thought here, I just wanted to give this to everyone. ARCs are established to, in my mind, to help owners through the process and to maintain architectural control of the community, therefore maintaining or enhancing property value. That is 100% what they're there to do. They're not supposed to be a roadblock to wish fulfillment, but they do have sometimes a not very fun duty to tell someone that they might not necessarily be able to have exactly what it is that they wanted. What an ARC always needs to be careful about is not making themselves designers, not saying, hey, you can't do this, but here's what we think you should do. They don't want to, you don't want to be held liable for making design choices or telling someone how they should alter it is what they're trying to do. Pointing them to the language in the documents, saying this is what is approvable and this is what generally you need to do to get this past the review process, and to stay objective is what an ARC needs to do all the time. It's a very, very easy position to let your personal thoughts and opinions on what looks good and what you think works to influence what decisions you're making, and pump the brakes real hard on any of that. The ARC needs to always stay objective and stay to the guidelines and the process that's in place. And this poor little kid isn't getting their birdhouse. Now, this would be an exterior addition to a landscape that may need to go through an ARC process. Well, it's 12:52. I'll open it this time for any, I feel like I just piled a whole lot of information at you. If there's any questions about what I've presented today, if you think of any after now, go ahead and reach out. Hopefully you've got someone at Aperian's email address and they can point you in the right direction, but I'm happy to answer anything that comes up right now.
Hey, Eric, I just wanted to mention, I was quiet during that, didn't have comments or questions, and partly because it was super informative and very cogent, very easy to follow. So I just wanted to quickly say, I appreciate the thought that you put into the presentation.
Thanks, Darren.
Yeah.
That's great. It's a lot. It's so much information, and it's so important to a lot of communities. I mean, for like Mike, who lives at the Atrium, which is a 8-unit, 8 or 9, I forget.
9.
9-unit, condominium building, where, people don't, the ARC process isn't going to be real applicable to that building. But in single family communities, again, communities that still have, that have remodels coming in all the time, that have people changing paint, that have people adding decks, that have new construction going on. I mean, this stuff is so key, and it's just so easy to get yourself in trouble if you don't have the right process and the right language, and people kind of knowing what they're doing. So hopefully that was helpful to other people as well.
So my one question is going to be when, and I'm in the newbie, so just, if this is, I'm happy to take it offline if I'm completely uninformed and everybody else is informed, but when you look at our HOA and you do a gap analysis, like, do we have the necessary documents? Do we have a necessary committee? I mean, are there any recommendations that you have of immediate things that we should be thinking about or worrying about or deciding?
Darren, can you remind me which community you're with?
I don't know that I'm on any committee. I think I laughed earlier because I have no treasury experience and they made me the treasurer. So.
For which community, Darren?
Oh, sorry, this is Pronghorn.
Pronghorn, okay. Okay, well, I know Pronghorn has a fairly robust architecture review process, but I know that, there's multiple associations within Pronghorn, and I've never worked with Pronghorn, but I know Aaron McKenna in our office, who I'm sure you know, could probably help with that.
Yeah, I'll go offline with Aaron. I thought I'd just thought I'd
But yeah, I know, I mean, Pronghorn's definitely one of those where there's construction going on all the time. And being able to monitor and have a process for all of that is it's key.
Yeah, I just put a bird feeder on the side of the house and I want to replace my front door with one with glass. So this is not just good as a board member, but as a resident.
Any other questions from today? All right, everyone. Well, I thank you very much for joining me over your hour. Darren, thank you for your words. Sometimes I feel like I'm just rambling and nothing's landing, but that was nice to hear. So thanks for joining me, everyone. We do these often about all kinds of different things, and hopefully you'll take a little something away from today.
Thank you.
Great job, Eric. I
Take care.
agree with Darren. Yep, you guys take care. Bye.